Welcome to GenderMeowster Podcast Network. Genderful is a talk show featuring non-binary and trans folks discussing various topics and special interests. We kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of identities. All opinions are the speaker's own. This show airs live on Twitch at twitch.tv/GenderMeowster, and VODs with show notes can also be found on YouTube. So, I'm GenderMeowster, and I use they, them pronouns just in case someone's here and has never seen the show before. And my honored guest, if you would introduce yourself with name and pronouns as well.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Dave, although you might know me better by my screen name handle Incendavery, under which I do diary comics, and my pronouns are he, him, or they, them. I actually have a handy little visual thing here. That's what you may know me as. That's what I usually look like.
On the
don't see my fleshy and bloody face quite so often as my little purple guy.
I love your little purple guy so much. So it's like a purple, is it a raven or a crow?
It is now a crow. When I designed it, I did not actually know how to tell the difference between a raven and a crow, so I just knew that I would see these big flocks of them in the town where I lived, and I knew I liked them, but I didn't know whether they were crows or ravens. So I just said, originally when I designed this character, I just said corvid generally, but I did eventually learn that what I was seeing were flocks of American crows, and so retroactively I decided it was a crow. If anyone's wondering, the way you can tell between a crow and a raven is ravens have scruffier neck feathers and scruffy feathers around their feet. And then the real giveaway is if you see a crow or a raven and you're like, yeah, that thing's reasonably sized, maybe a little big, it's a crow. If you're like, that thing is huge, that is such a big bird, then it's a raven.
Yeah, ravens are huge. Ravens also do an awk. Their cries are like awk. It's almost like someone hitting wood on wood, awk. And crows are more caw, caw.
Yeah, that stereotypical cawing sound is like the crow sound. Though they both, I think, have like a pretty wide variety of interesting sounds they can make. I haven't seen many ravens, but one of the very few times I have seen a raven in person, it was making sort of like a clicking sound over and over, which up until that moment I had no idea they could do.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. On my camping trip I went on with my family recently, we saw both ravens and crows.
Excellent.
And it was really cool. I think we actually saw a nesting partner ravens way up in the trees. So it was hard to see how big they were, but one was standing there doing the awk awk sound, and then a few minutes later another one flew over and they started preening each other's heads, and I was like, they're so cute.
What a wonderful sighting. Little
goth emo burbs. doing a heckin' loving on each other. So cute. So we talked about this before the show started, but I'll mention again that on my show, guests are totally allowed to be neurodivergent and like fidget and stim and wiggle around. So just as a note for both us and anyone who's watching along, if you see us like doing this or whatever, it's fine. Totally allowed. I love your purple fidget. Purple is my favorite color.
Purple is my favorite color. That's why I have a purple bird. That's literally the entire reason. Well, it's because I had a purple, because purple is my favorite color, but it is also because when I designed the bird, I did not have a black marker. So I decided to just sub it in.
That's amazing.
Designing these comics came like right at the same time. I had just purchased alcohol markers for the first time, and I was like, I think it'll totally defeat the purpose of these comics. Like, I'm supposed to be expressing myself and my emotions very freely and not getting too hung up on the artistry of it all. So I feel like it's going to defeat the entire purpose if I do what I usually do, which, up until that point was like, I mainly did illustrations, lots of fan art, of course. I would do like pencil or line art traditionally and then scan it and color them digitally. And I was like, no, I'm just going to cut that all out. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to do this all traditional. But I only had a handful of alcohol markers, and purple was one of them. So I was like, no, purple's my favorite. Let's just have a purple crow.
That's so great. Do you have any pets? So I have Nefertiti, and you
Yes, I
mentioned you
do.
might have some, and I'd love to hear about them.
I do. I have 3 lizards and 1 snake. So I have the Admiral. He's a leopard gecko. Terry is another leopard gecko. Yeah,
Is
I
Terry
wish I
named
had
after
pitched.
Terry Pratchett?
She is, yeah, actually.
Oh, I love
I
that.
wasn't the one who named her, her second owner, but she was named after Terry Pratchett, and I love her name. I love the Admiral's name too. I also did not name the Admiral, but um, Terry's very chill. She's like a little old lady leopard gecko, whereas the Admiral is like very energetic, a little bit of a troublemaker. So I love his name because I can always joke when he's getting into trouble that his behavior is unbecoming for a man of his rank.
Use those gender
Um,
stereotypes against the spotted gecko.
and then I also have a southern alligator lizard named Yuri. Full name is Yuri Plizertsky. So at the time, my partner and I were very into Yuri on Ice, and there's a character named Yuri Plizetsky, so we decided to make a lizard pun on that.
That's so fun.
And then we have a red-tailed boa, again with a pun name. Her name is Horatio Hornboa because my partner is a big fan of the Horatio Hornblower books and miniseries. We also have some
So cool.
snails. Those are
Two
our pets.
snails.
Yeah.
One of the mods in my Discord server has these like water snails that had babies, and so like there's
Oh
pictures
my
of these little like
goodness.
2-hour-old little bitty water snails in the Pet Pics into Awe channel.
Baby
So
snails are just unbelievably small. They're the tiniest possible thing. I love them.
yes, I like the curly shells.
Yes.
So great. So, well, will you tell us a little bit about yourself? Any special interests you might have, or any of that sort of thing?
Yeah. Obviously, dire comics is what I do, but drawing, both comics specifically and drawing in general, is um, a big interest of mine in general. But beyond drawing, I got into roller skating last year, and that's been incredibly fun. I like to roller skate. I'll either, I kind of live in a house with one of those like unfinished basements that just has like the straight concrete floor. So sometimes so I spent like the very early months of 2020 just going in teeny little circles in my basement. And then um, as I've ventured outside a little more, I've gotten into park skating, which is very fun. Roller skating at the skate park. Um,
What color are
in
the
earlier,
wheels?
uh, the wheels are black, uh, the skates are black, but the laces are purple.
There you go.
Uh, I so badly wanted purple roller skates, but at the time I was into it, and kind of still is. There was like a lot of people got into roller skating, so there's been a bit of a skate shortage. So I settled for black roller skates, but now I wouldn't change them. I think the black roller skate with the purple laces is really fun, classy look.
That's so fun.
Um, Also, in earlier times, I'm a big fan of choir music. You know, when germs are not so much of a concern, I like to sing in choirs. Yeah.
What part do you usually sing? Maybe before tea, and then now after tea, what part do you think you would sing?
After tea, I sing bass, which is just huge amount of gender euphoria for me, I'll be honest. I feel so sad because I know my talking voice is a little bit high, just because I've never bothered to try and train it down more beyond where it dropped with tea. But I get so satisfied whenever anyone asks me what I sing, and I sing like, "Oh, I'm a bass," and they get surprised. Um, pre tea, I sang. I started out when I was younger singing soprano. That's where my voice naturally was pre tea. But I did sing for enough long enough that pre-T, I was actually able to get my range low enough to join into the tenor section.
That's
So I
awesome.
did actually have experience in the tenor section before starting T.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I've sung tenor, alto, and soprano. That's how much range that I naturally
Oh
have
wow.
before any HRT. It's pretty cool. Yeah, the last choir I
Got a
was in,
powerful range
I
there.
was in like a super gay choir. Like it was so gay.
Oh, that's fun.
So gay. And yeah, I was a soprano one in the super gay choir with like 8 parts. Like, yeah, it was
Yeah.
wild.
I miss my choir a lot, but they were wonderful, but they were definitely not super gay. I think I was the youngest person there by about 30 years. It was a very much a sort of retirement populated choir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, singing. Well, would you tell us a little bit about your experience with gender? How has your relationship to gender evolved over time?
Um, Evolve it has. I've had, let me think, I sort of started suspecting I was like maybe not a girl when I was sort of in my late teens, sort of closing in on the 18th birthday. I was also closing in on that realization. And I'm now in my late 20s, so I've had coming up on a decade for my gender experience of being trans to sort of evolve. And I think the biggest thing that's changed for me is just both learning to trust myself about um, what feels good and what doesn't feel good gender wise. And then also one of the big things I think is just becoming more secure both with like my non-binary identity and with my masculine identity, being okay being a more gender non-conforming masculine, trans masculine person. Because I feel like um, the trans, uh, trans rights and all, I think obviously we've got still plenty of progress we can make there. But I do feel like now it's a little different than, or at least I feel it's a little different than it was back in like 2012, 2013. I feel like non-binary identities weren't quite like there wasn't quite as much information about them out there. Even on being trans, I feel like maybe that was just my perception, but I feel like there wasn't as much information out there. And when you got it, it was pretty binary focused. I remember
Mm-hmm.
kind of freaking out when I figured out that I wasn't a girl because I was like, oh my God, I'm a guy. Okay, I need to decide whether being a guy is worth giving up all this stuff. I can never wear makeup. I can never have my long hair anymore. Even though I think I look really pretty with long hair, I can't wear skirts anymore, even though I kind of like skirts. Uh, and I think the spaces I was in at the time was like I was on like Tumblr 2012, 2013. It was like the golden era of like FTMs. Like FTM was still like the generally accepted term. Like we don't that's
Mm-hmm.
last time I checked, we don't really use that much anymore. And over the years, I've really become more confident with like you can transition to being a non-binary guy. That's an option. You can be non-binary, you can be gender non-conforming, you can
Mm-hmm.
have the long hair and the makeup and the it's not on screen, but the skirts, and you're still a guy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think that's like one of the biggest things that's changed for me over the years is really feeling comfortable with that gender nonconformity, that non-binariness, and also really honing in on like my sense of what makes me feel gender euphoric. I don't know. I do feel like it's sort of a process where you sort of need to learn to listen to yourself and learn to figure out what these complicated feelings you're having are, what feelings you're having that maybe like what feelings are maybe more stuff you want to do and maybe what stuff is like stuff you've sort of internalized that you're supposed to do and parsing it
Mm-hmm.
apart. Yeah.
Yeah, pulling apart the script that one was handed and what you actually want is a huge work of coming of age, I feel like.
Yeah.
like maturing from like I'm a teenager who's the age of an adult to like I'm actually an adult now.
Yeah. It has, and I think there has also just been, I think your gender just tends to change a little bit over the years. Had more of a complete thought about that, but it's already gone. So
It's okay.
I don't know.
We're allowed to be neurodivergent, neurowonderful beings. Um, so you make comics,
I do.
and I'm curious if you could tell us about what kinds of biographical topics that you cover in your comics. So you've got your
Yeah.
awesome purple friend.
Yes. So my comics originally started as a therapy tool, actually. Um, I had started therapy for various reasons. Like it was sort of one of those things of like, man, I don't know what's going on with me, but like something here isn't working. Let's get to the therapist and get to the bottom of this. And my therapist was very into like homework and like things you could do at home to sort of work a bit and work a bit on like what you were trying to get through. And she was like, look, I've noticed you love drawing. I think it would be really worth it to try and do some comics, both as a way to record what you're feeling. Because I know I struggle with, you know, when I'm feeling something in the moment, I'm really feeling it. But as soon as that feeling's gone, it's really hard to remember how I felt, like the specifics of how I felt. Um, so to record what was going on with me, and then also as sort of a way to externalize my feelings of like, okay, here's a place I can put different feelings I'm having or different problems I'm struggling with. So she asked me to make like a very simple character. She's like, you know, don't make a human where you'll be like worrying about the drawing anatomy and stuff.
Hmm.
Just make a very simple character that you can draw like with your eyes closed. You don't have to worry about it looking artistically good. And I experimented a little. I uh, I drew up like a cat character, a deer character. I think I considered even just like a geometric triangle. And I eventually settled on this crow character.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time, I had minuscule social media presence, although I liked posting my art and I was mostly posting fan art at the time, but I decided like, hey, I've been drawing these things. I have an art account. Why don't I just post them? So I did. That's how I started posting them. But even from the beginning there, they were very focused on topics like feeling depressed, feeling anxious, or even just problems that don't have like a, I don't know, even just problems that were just stuff I was dealing with, just anything I felt like I needed to work through a little, and that like I felt like if I just sort of put it on the page, I might like have a clearer view on it or feel a bit better about it, or just remember that it was something I needed to go back and sort of work on. And as I became more comfortable with it, and I sort of started incorporating in more just funny moments from life. I don't know, a
Mm-hmm.
friend would say something or my partner would say something. I'm like, huh, that makes me laugh. I'd like to put that in a comic. So it sort of branched into being much more general, but originally it did have that root as a therapy tool. And I think that's something I still do to this day of try to sort of work things out through these comics or use these comics to express things I feel like I'm struggling with.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing both how your crow character came to life and like, you know, the beginnings. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, so one question that I also had is with your comics. So you post them a lot of places. Will you tell us about just the sort of the general places that you post them to begin
Yeah.
with?
I've been posting them on Tumblr since the beginning. And in fact, I think I've always intended like, oh, I should really go back and like scan my whole archive and like consolidate it somewhere like a like a dedicated web comic page or something. But I think to date, my Tumblr is the only point that, or the only place that has all of my comics from the very beginning. At some point, I added on Instagram and started posting to both of them. So I post them to Instagram now too. And there's the Instagram doesn't have the very oldest ones. If you scroll back, there's just a point when I started and kept on from that point. And the same is with Twitter. Currently, I post them on Tumblr, on Instagram, and on Twitter. But Tumblr is the one that has all of them. Instagram has a couple more, and Twitter, I think I only started using in the past 2 years or so. Maybe a little more, but it's pretty recent for me.
And for anyone listening or watching this on YouTube later, Incendavery is Dave's handle on all of those websites. So, and that'll be in the show notes as well. You also have a Patreon that has, I would say, a pretty impressive level of participation. That's cool to see.
Thank
your
you.
Patreon.
I've worked hard on it. Yeah, it's currently I use it for sort of newsletter style monthly updates, which are, I post them there, but you don't need to be a Patreon or you don't need to be a patron of my Patreon to read them. And I'll usually post sort of what's been going on in my life, what I've been working on. I like to include like mini reviews of the different media I've been consuming, books, comics. And then for a long time, I only used it as a tip jar, but I have started using it as sort of I've started this monthly sticker club thing where you can, sign up on my Patreon, and each month you get like a little sticker, and the designs new each month. And I've been pouring a lot of energy into it, and I think it's paid off.
That's awesome.
I've got a lot of wonderful patrons, and I'm incredibly thankful for them.
Yeah. As a fellow sort of independent queer content creator, I agree. Patreon patrons are the bomb.
Really
so
are.
Great.
The MVPs.
Truly. I'm so grateful. So when you make your content, what have you noticed that folks respond to the most?
I think I usually, in the beginning, I sort of was like really struggling for labels and would sort of try to put them in different tags, but I've sort of stopped that these days because I find that when it comes to sort of neurodivergency and depression, anxiety, and beyond that, all sorts of other things, there's, there can be really a lot of crossover and overlap. Even if I have whatever I've got going on, and maybe another reader has ADHD, and another person is coping with bipolar, like there might be something in my comics that all of us can relate to. So I find that people will sort of relate to different things that I talk about. Although I think the number one thing that people sort of are like, I didn't know that was a thing. I do that, and I didn't know that was a thing, is skin picking, which is something I struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with quite a lot of like, I did not realize that, that there is such a thing as body focused repetitive behaviors, and that, it can be very difficult to not pick at your skin, and you can be sort of like, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? This is so gross. Mm-hmm. And I've had, I think more than any other thing, I've had people saying like, I did not realize there was a specific term for this. Now that I know that there's a specific term for this, I've looked this up, and I suddenly have so much more information and tools about this thing, where I just thought it was this thing where I was just being gross, or I never grew out of it. Or like I didn't know why I couldn't just stop or just cut it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is something that I've also lived with my whole life. And one day I was scrolling through Instagram, and there was your little animated comic. You had your little bird like, I'm going to stop this thing. You should do this. Nope. You should do this. I'm not going to do that either. You should do this. Nope. Not going to happen. And I was like, wow, That's incredibly relatable. Like, just the courage that you have to talk about that, I think it also frees other people to be honest about what they're going through. I mean, that's why I have a gender talk show, right? So we can talk about gender
Yeah.
and talk about the many different ways to be a genderful being, to be not cis. Like, there's more than just one way. And yeah, I was so amazed to see that representation. So thank you for writing that representation into the world. That's really cool of
Yeah.
you. That's so
I'm,
cool.
I don't know, I am perpetually amazed and very glad that there are people out there who relate to my comics and like let me know about that. Cause then it's like, I don't know, that feels good for me too. Cause I'm like, I'm not alone in this either. Like there are people out there who are telling me that they experience this same thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me too, it's like as a person self diagnosed with autism, my wife is also self diagnosed with autism, and we've talked about having to rewrite those sort of self facing stims. Because the need to stim doesn't go away. Like you can't just say like no skin picking, end of story. We're
Yeah.
just not going to stim ever. It's like nope, you got to have a different plan. And so what she does is she does like hand massage. She
Oh,
does like self
that's such a
massage
good idea.
instead because there's still you still have sort of the energy and the skin touch and that. And that to me has been a way more helpful suggestion than like the behavioral therapy stuff therapists have tried to give me. Like every time you want to do it, like snap your wrist with a hair tie. It's like behavioral therapy did not work
Yeah.
for me at all.
I have never heard the hand massage tip, but I actually love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel
Well,
like
and it
I've
can be
tried so
it can be
many
your
like weird
arm
little
too. It
tricks.
can be like the stimming. It can be massaging any part of yourself, but it's like turning that sort of the searching behavior and then the finding and the itching and the whatever into like it's more about self love and like
Yeah,
it's still stress relieving, right? Because for me, the skin picking is about stress relief. It's about like
yeah.
for whatever reason, this relieves stress for me, and so like this can help too. The compression, which as an autistic person, love me some compression, and
Oh,
the
yes.
like muscle manipulation can really help. So anyway, it's not a perfect solution. I'm not saying it is
Yeah.
the only way to like overcome. I don't know if that's even a goal to ever overcome that like coping
I feel like
tool.
when it comes to something like
But
this, it's nice to just gather different tools and see what
yeah,
works for you.
it's nice to have
So,
options.
yeah,
So it's an option.
it's an option.
It's a choice. It's an option. I love that so much. Um, Your comics are so relatable. How is it for you being honest and vulnerable in comic form?
Um, I'll be honest, it's something that like my comfort with being open in my comics sort of like tends to wax and wane a bit. Like some, I don't know, I'll go through like times when I'm like, I have absolutely no self-consciousness about putting stuff onto the paper. Just I think it, I draw it, it is done. Every so often I'll just, whether it's because I've like hit like a patch where I haven't drawn in a little bit, or if I sometimes I just suddenly am overcome with self-consciousness, but sometimes I'll just realize like, oh my God, are people reading this? Maybe there are people judging me about this. I don't know anymore what I should put in here. And I usually try to like calm myself down, being like, no, just focus on drawing it. If you draw it and then look at it and decide you don't want to put it out in the world, you don't have to. It can live in your sketchbook forever. And I'm not sure I've ever taken myself up on that in the end. Um, I also definitely have had like, I spend time like checking in with myself of like, what am I comfortable portraying about myself in these comics? And sometimes like if I'm not comfortable sharing something yet, I won't force myself to draw it. I'll just let it like uh, turn over in the back of the brain for a while instead. I also feel like having other people in my comics, I try because other people do appear in my comics. I don't know, the only other little guy I've got here is the little squirrel who may be recognizable to anyone who
Mm-hmm.
follows me, but both my partner will appear as the black squirrel. my friends will make appearances from time to time. And I've really tried over the years to sort of be respectful of what I'm including about other people, how I'm portraying them. And then I sort of, when I'm feeling kind of self-conscious, I try to almost think of myself that way and try to think of myself the way I think of someone else. It's like, okay, am I being fair to myself of how I feel like I'm portraying myself? On the other hand, do I feel like I'm being honest? Do I feel like I'm expressing my emotions here? And I think it is very much a thing that gets practiced and learned over time of like, okay, where are my comfort levels at? How much do I want to express things through this format? What things do I feel like I'm bothered by that I just don't feel like are appropriate for this format? That's something too. I don't remember where I read this advice, but a piece of advice I once heard is that if you do like diary comics or like any other medium where you're like expressing a lot of your personal self, I think it might have even been like a advice for like bloggers or something, but that in addition to that, you should have a group chat with your friends and a private account or locked diary somewhere that no one ever looks at except you. And honestly, that's been like, that's been something that's been very helpful for me of if there's something I'm dealing with where I don't feel comfortable putting into a comic, but I'm like, I need to get this out somehow. How do I do this? I usually put this in a comic. It's like, oh, depending on what it is, maybe I can talk to my friends about it. Like that sounds, I know that sounds so obvious when you say it out loud, but like talk to friends about it. Or maybe if it's something that you're feeling really private about, just put it in, you're allowed to put it in a journal. You never have to put it in a comic if you don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Which gives you get to be more at choice about it because you have multiple outlets for the stuff that you're processing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's something I've learned and am continuing to learn over the years. It's just where my boundaries are with everything.
Mm-hmm. What sparked your interest in drawing?
Obviously, I drew a little as a kid. I think most kids draw before they've sort of learned that self-consciousness of like, oh, I'm drawing and it doesn't look like a thing. That's bad. But like I feel like drawing for me can definitely be traced back to the day as like a 12, 13-year-old. I went over to my friend's house and she had this how to draw manga book on her kitchen table. And we spent the entire afternoon like flipping through the pages and like following the step-by-step instructions. My friend eventually moved on to another thing, but for me, that sort of sparked a lasting interest. So started with those how to draw manga books and just from there never really stopped and kept refining my drawing, practicing my drawings and refining my styles over the years.
I love that. I remember those books back in the day.
Yeah,
I had
it's
friends
so
with
funny
those
looking
too.
back at them because it's like, yeah, it's so funny looking back at them because I remember at the time being like, oh my God, I will never be able to draw this well. And now I'm like, oh my God, I can maybe even draw better than this book now. Maybe.
I love that so much. Did you go to school for art?
I didn't. Growing up, I was homeschooled. So we had a community college near us where there was sort of an arrangement where homeschoolers could sort of sign up to take community college courses, even if they weren't college aged yet. So as a teenager, I took a lot of like art courses at that community college. So I definitely did have that like sort of environment of having an art teacher sort of instruct you on how to look at things you're drawing. I took a color theory class, which probably to this date is the most useful thing I've ever learned having to do with art. So I would take color theory classes, I would take artistic anatomy classes, and I just did that for several years. But I never really progressed past the community college level. I never went to art school. I never majored in art. I sort of, now I've got a bit more of an idea of like, what my whole deal is. I realize like, oh, I sort of struggle with anxiety. I struggle with executive dysfunction sometimes. I've got some neurodivergencies going on. But at the time of taking those community college courses, I was just like, these classes are 3 hours long, and I cannot sit still for this entire 3 hours. I don't know how I can possibly major in art if I can't sit through a community college class. So it wasn't something I ended up pursuing. I just took that community college knowledge and kept on practicing on my own time while I did other stuff. And eventually I practiced so much that the drawing started to eclipse the other stuff, which is
so cool.
Fine by me.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your alcohol markers. I wonder what
Yes.
other materials you use for your comics. Obviously, you have to draw upon something. And
Yes.
maybe you also use different types of markers for outlining versus coloring in versus, I don't know.
Yeah, so got my sketchbook here, and it's hard to tell what it is because I've got like my stickers all over it, but I like to draw in sketchbooks. I use Canson mixed media paper just because that's what I've found I like the most. I tried switching to like a new fancy sketchbook recently where the marker wasn't supposed to bleed through, but I ended up not liking it. I didn't like the coating. I missed the spiral binding. So I like my mixed media sketchbooks. I'll usually do like a sketch with like a color erase pencil, which is like a pencil where it'll draw in color, but you can still erase it. Sort of. It's not an easy pencil to erase, but you can erase it a good amount. And it blends really nicely with the watercolor markers alcohol based markers, because even if you can't erase the colored sketch completely, the way the alcohol markers interact with it, the sketch will sort of melt away, and you might have sort of, it might still be there as sort of, I find it just tends to sort of warm the colors I'm using up a little bit, but you can't really see the sketch. And then I use, for the lines, I usually go in the order sketch, line art, color. I'll use like jelly roll pens.
Love it.
I used to use microns way back when, but I don't know. I've expressed this opinion before, and I guess some people have no problem using alcohol-based markers with micron pens, but I cannot get the alcohol markers to not smear the micron pens, no matter how long I wait. But when I was just experimenting with different pens, for some reason, the jelly roll pens interact really well with the alcohol markers and barely ever smear. So that's what I end up
inner
using.
sixth grader is thrilled to hear you say that you use jelly pens.
I don't actually know a lot of other artists who use jelly roll pens. And then I'll also use for like line art and stuff. I'll also use colored pencils sometimes. More often when I'm drawing human characters, and I use like a pink colored pencil for the blush, but I'm a big fan of how colored pencils look layered on top of marker.
That's awesome.
And I have other mediums I'll experiment with, but those are like my main bread and butter artist tools.
I love that. That's so fun. So if we subscribe to your Patreon, you can buy more jelly pens, is what you're saying.
I can. That is absolutely what that means.
More jelly pens.
Keep me in purple jelly roll pens.
I love it so much. Plus, there's that little bit of sparkle to it, which just makes it gayer.
Yeah.
That's so fun. How many comics do you think you've drawn over the years?
So I count them up a couple every so often. I think sometime over summer was the last time I counted them up, and I had drawn over 1,000 comics at that point. So now it's definitely over 1,000. And it's hard to like tell how many I draw per year, because my pace has definitely picked up over time as I become more familiar with the process. I think probably I did not draw as many per year in my first couple years as I do have in the past couple years. I think, to give you an idea of like the clip I'm working at now, when I counted this past summer, I was over 1,000. The last time I'd counted before that was the summer before that, and I was around 850. So during that years long cycle, I drew about 250 comics.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like 4 a
And
week.
yeah, that's closing in on, because I don't, there have been times in my life when I've drawn a comic every single day, but that's a very hard pace to keep up. But
Yeah.
I do
It's hard
try
to
to
have a life
draw.
and do that.
Yeah, I do try to draw every day though, so that ends up adding up all the comics that I've drawn over the years when you sit down with your sketchbook every day.
That's so cool. Do you ever like work ahead? Do you like have an idea in your mind of like the next 10 comics you're gonna draw, or is it sort of you figure it out each time as you go?
Never as extreme as 10 comics ahead. I'll sometimes get like maybe a day or two ahead if I'm having like a lot of ideas. But generally I sort of have buffer stages that ideas tend to sit in. So I have like a notes document on my phone where I'll usually like jot down possible ideas, and sometimes they don't even make it past that. And then I have, if I decide like an idea has legs, I'll like jot it down on like, do like a little rough draft, very simple, on a little piece of paper. And sometimes like I'll have a couple of those pile up, but that's usually where they stay if I've got a lot of ideas and I'm working ahead, is I'll sort of pile up those rough drafts and sort of have them to the side. And then each day I'll usually pick and draw that comic. I've tried a couple times to get ahead and it just never seems to happen. I have a very same day process streamlined.
Hmm. What if you want to go on vacation? Do you just not post comics for that week or whatever? Or do you put schedule ahead?
In that case, sometimes I will sort of try to schedule ahead, though. I'll often also lean on other stuff, like maybe I might make like one or two comics ahead, but then I might look through my sketchbook for non-comic pieces of art that I haven't shared that I might just make into a post. Um, Now with the advent of reels, that's actually something I can use to sort of schedule things ahead,
Hmm.
because I've got with the reels, that's that sort of little guy I was holding up before. This is like one of the little paper puppets I use to make the animated Instagram reels. Um, and those, since I'm not drawing, since I can like reuse the pieces and I'm more moving them around and animating them,
Hmm.
those are often something that are easier to make ahead.
Yeah.
I also have my freeform illustration style, which I'll sometimes make those ahead. So I'll sort of try to work ahead to prepare some different posts. And I'll try to like focus on stuff, trying to convert stuff I already have that I might not have shown,
Hmm.
and mix in a couple comics.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's hard to figure out how to take a vacation when you're a content creator.
yeah, it
It's like,
is. I feel like part of the reason was gonna say, I feel like I haven't actually had very many vacations. I don't have too many examples to draw from.
yeah. Downtime is good though. I'm really grateful I got to go on a camping trip this last week with my family. It was cute.
Yeah, it sounds like it went wonderfully.
Yeah. Plus, otherwise I wouldn't have met those two cool ravens.
Yeah,
All
never
right.
know what you'll find if you just take a quick break.
It's true. So we have about 9 minutes left because I want to respect the 1 hour time boundary request.
Oh wow, time
Um,
just flew by.
it totally does, yeah. And
You're very easy to
we have
talk to.
bodies. Oh, thanks. It's very kind. So I'm trying to decide which of these 5 questions we're going to get to. Maybe we can combine the next 2 questions. What comic artists inspire you, and what other queer comic content creators or comic creators can you recommend?
Okay, for like early inspiration, something that's left a big impression on me was when I was a kid, I loved reading like newspaper comic anthologies. Like my family just had a lot of them on the bookshelf, like Garfield, Foxtrot, Calvin and Hobbes, Kathy, Pearls Before Swine. And I feel like that shaped my comics sensibility a lot, just in terms of these, like, I wouldn't necessarily call what I do gag a day strips since they don't always have jokes, but sort of that episodic format definitely had a big impact on me. And then when I was starting to draw two strips that had like a huge impact on like the way I thought about comics and my style was Andre and Carl and Clementine and Friends. I think those were both on Tumblr. I don't know if either of those are active anymore, but both wonderful comics that really impacted um, how I thought about comics and my personal style. Other queer comic creators I can recommend. I sort of made myself a little list here of different queer comic creators, and most of these will be on Instagram. Never Art, Bad Hands Comics, Imogen.Mangle, Emily Never, Wizwo, Chuck Draws Things, Ruby, etc. Like I feel like there's a real wealth of like really interesting queer comic creators on Instagram, especially in the diary comics arena. Although I also really like Chuck Draws Things, Bad Hands Comics are both do like diary comics, autobiographical comics, whereas Art has many fictional characters that he does like. He's got several different like comics he's done with his characters that are so cool. I don't know. I aspire to be able to do that kind of like fiction in comics. And then I also really like moving on to more of the published graphic novel world. There's a lot of like graphic novelists I really like. Tilly Walden, Jillian Tamaki and Mariko Tamaki, Rosemary Valero O'Connell, Trung Le Nguyen, Julia Kay, Kelsey Roten. Like I feel like especially now these past couple years, like we're getting so much diversity in like more and more diversity in published graphic novels, and there are so many incredible like published comics out there to like look at and read. So those are just a handful of my favorites I like jotted down for myself to try and be sure to share.
Thank you for taking time to make that list. I look forward to checking all of them out later. Hooray. So for someone who's listening to this and thinks like, wow, it's so cool that Dave has figured out how to do this and like be an artist, what advice would you give to someone who wants to start making their own comics?
I think the advice that my therapist gave me was really good advice of to find a character that you can just draw very easily with no worries. There's a real temptation to get caught up in the details, get caught up in making the comic look correct, look beautiful. But it's much more important to just get it drawn. So trying to find a very easy to draw character helps a lot. If it helps you to sort of take the expectation that someone else will read it off, absolutely do that. I think it could be incredibly valuable to just draw comics only for your own sake. And beyond that, it's like, it sounds like obvious advice, but just really to go for it and just not be afraid of putting images down on the blank paper. Like, perhaps even without having an end goal comic in mind, just start drawing faces of how you feel, or start writing down thoughts that are going through your head. Put them in like a speech bubble and point the speech bubble at your little character you've designed. Like, the best way to start making comics is to really just jump into it.
I love that.
At least in my opinion.
Get a notebook and start doing stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry about having the right materials. Don't worry if you're like doing it correctly, or if don't even worry about it looking good. Just become comfortable with putting your ideas down on the page, putting your thoughts down on the page.
Love that. Can you share a moment of gender euphoria?
We talked about choir singing towards the beginning of this discussion, but when I realized I could sing bass, that was just such a moment of joy for me. I don't know, I'd always been proud of my soprano voice, but hearing myself sing in this deep bass voice and hitting these notes I never thought I would be able to hit, it just felt great. For a more recent one, I had top surgery like years and years ago, but even though before top surgery I was like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna like take my shirt off all the time. I ended up just being too self-conscious to ever do it for years and years.
Hmm.
But this summer has been hot enough that it's finally cracked me, and I was like, I need to take my shirt off or I will die of heat. And once I'd started getting used to that, it's like, oh my God, I can just be shirtless. This feels great.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, it took me years and years to get here, but this is awesome.
Yeah, that is so
To
awesome. I turned on my Zoom beard filter because for some reason it wasn't on, and that's one of the things that gives me gender euphoria.
I saw that when I was like looking at other episodes of this show. I love your Zoom filter beard. I think that's so wonderful.
I feel so handsome in it. I forgot to have it
You look
on.
so handsome.
Thank you. Yay. Okay, let's see. I think I have two questions left.
All right.
And we have 2 minutes. I'm happy to go a few minutes long if you are,
Yeah, we
but
can go a few minutes long. That's fine. Let's
okay,
finish off those questions.
awesome. Um, what would you like to make sure folks know about your perspective on gender and non binary issues?
I thought about this one a lot, and I'm not even sure if I have a good answer. Um, like, I feel like my answer towards cis people is usually just like, man, just support your trans friends. Like, they're going through it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my answer for anyone who's like trans or non-binary is to just like, I really hope that you like trust yourself and listen to yourself. And like, it's such a simple thing to say, but it's such an incredibly hard thing to do.
Totally.
And like, there's no one right way to be trans. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing is that like, I feel, even though it may seem obvious to say that, I feel like it's so easy to not think about it when you're applying it to your own self. You're like, I must be doing this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hopefully that was coherent.
it totally was. I totally agree that like the combination of like if you're trans enough. Like
Yeah.
there's no if you think you're trans. You don't have to do anything else to be trans enough.
And it can
And
be
there
so hard to internalize it. I know I
totally.
struggled with that for years. I know so many people who struggle with that. Like, but it's true, you're trans enough. If you're trans, you're trans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, for my Patreon patrons, I've started a secret Twitter that is like just for patrons, and it has
Oh,
all these
fun.
affirmations. So there's like daily affirmations, and once in a while I'll throw in one about like your gender is valid even if it changes later. Like,
Oh,
just as a reminder, like,
yeah.
you
That's why,
know,
and that's so important to remember.
hmm yeah. Cool. Well, my last question for you is, are there any resources that you would like to recommend for non-binary and trans individuals or allies?
I unfortunately am not very up on my trans resources. I was gonna say a lot of the resources I used were a lot of resources I use and have used in the past have been very location specific.
Hmm.
Like a lot of back when I was back when my physical transition was more of a thing I was, getting underway. I got a lot of support from Planned Parenthood.
Hmm.
So I suppose that's something to look into. Depending on where you are, Planned Parenthood might be able to do more for you than you think. Um, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of resources. So I'm sorry to uh, not have a great answer for that.
No, it's okay. I like to think that this particular show is one of those resources.
That is true.
We are also affiliated with the Trans Community Center, which is a Discord server for trans folks. It's huge. I'm one of the 4 trans content creators that's sort of highlighted in that 5,000 plus people community. So I just plunked the info for them in the chat. If anyone is interested in checking them out. There's also the Gender Dysphoria Bible, which is a wonderful resource that is still evolving. Um, and that was our guest last week, was the person who helped make that be a thing. So
It's so cool.
I was so lucky to get to sit down and talk with Twift about that resource. If you've never seen the website, it's definitely worth perusing. And one thing that we sort of identified in our chat together is the need for more sort of non-binary representation and information for it, because the primary author, is a trans woman who has pulled in as many other trans people as like she can get her hands on to contribute, and doing the show actually sort of lit the fire under her butt to get the submission guide to submit like line edits, or please add this thing, or here's a piece of writing to put in the thing. She finally got that updated. So after the
Oh,
recording of
that's
the
really cool.
episode, that was sort of created. So it's in the show notes now on YouTube. But yeah, it's cool. There's this cool stuff out there, and that resource has only been around for a couple of years. Like it sounds like when you were starting your transition journey, like that didn't even exist yet, because the trans
No,
person who made
there's
that hadn't started transitioning yet. And so it's like, it's so cool to see all the new things that are sort of blossoming out of places.
it really is. Like it's been I feel like that's been such a joy over the past like 10 or so years, is getting to see the trans community grow, and uh for it to be like a more public, like it feels weird to say like public, but gosh, I'm tripping over my words now, but it's been so cool seeing like more and more trans people um, just around and building these resources for the community. Um, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool. Well, is there any cross promo you want to share? You've mentioned your Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, and Patreon.
Yeah, I think that's about it. I post, I believe my name is somewhere on the screen, Incendavery. That is my handle for everything. So if all else fails, just plug that into Google and you'll come find me through some sort of stream. But I post to Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr under Incendavery. And then I also have a Patreon where you can read updates about me for free, or you can join in the monthly sticker club and get some neat exclusive sticker designs mailed to you every month. And that is
So
also under
cool.
that same name, Incendavery.
I love it so much. Um, well, does your purple burb character have a name?
Interestingly enough, I tend to call them just the Corvid, but they are technically named Dave too. The very first
Oh,
comic I made, they like were answering the phone and introduced themselves as Dave. So according to the comics canon, their name is also Dave.
that's
But
amazing.
I usually just call them the Crow or the Corvid or just my little guy.
Ooh, your little guy. So cute. I love it so much. Well, thank you, Dave, so much for being my guest. This has been a huge delight to have you here on the show.